Friend, enemy, or frenemy? How do Indians view the rise of China and its implications for India's rise? Join the conversation on this important topic by taking the China Challenge survey. The survey has been put together by researchers at the Takshashila Institution. Answer our 10 simple questions and let your voice be heard in shaping India's policy towards China. For more details, log on to www.takshashila.org.in or you can click on the link and take the survey in the show notes. Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. A lot of the digital services that we use are moving to the cloud. From the pictures we take on our phones to the documents we edit and share, a lot of these things are happening on the cloud. And cloud computing services are playing an increasingly important role, but might not always be visible or aware to the end user. So the folks at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, ICRIA, have published a report analyzing the competition in the Indian cloud computing market. We have with us the authors of that report, and we're hoping that they can shed some light, help us understand this market better and the issues around that. So we have with us Ms. Payal Malik, Ms. Bhargavee and Mr. Harishankar Jagadeesh. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for making the time for this conversation.
Thank you.
I'll quickly ask Ms. Malik to kind of set the context. Why did you feel that this was something that had to be done? What is the context in which such an analysis was necessary?
Yeah, thank you, Bharath, for reading our report, and thank you for the interest. So, at the ICRIA Process Center for Internet and Digital Economy, which is a part of the team in which we researchers are operating in, we are looking at competition issues in various digital markets. And given the fact that cloud computing now is going to be the engine that powers several emerging technologies, and more importantly, artificial intelligence, given the previous digital markets experience, because cloud computing is also a platform-centric market, and how these platform-centric markets, given the nature of these markets, tend to get concentrated. We wanted to have a deep dive to look at how this market is structured. There were many competition authorities which were looking at the cloud market. There were reports, one from the French Competition Authority, one from the United Kingdom's CMA. The reason competition authorities look at these markets closely to see, and especially these are new markets, these are emerging markets. So the structure of the market is not clear. The interactions in the market between the users of a service and the providers of the service is not clear. So it's always before even for competition authorities, before even jumping into any kind of adjudication, an understanding of the landscape or the lay of the land, as you say, is very important. And why cloud was getting important was because, as I've mentioned, AI being the next driver of the technological transformation, and most countries are adopting it. The use of cloud for AI applications and use of cloud services to, as the Digital Competition Law Committee report mentions, cloud service, it defines cloud service, a digital service that enables access to a scalable and elastic pool of computer resources. So basically, the computer resources are a very important component of your AI stack. So how your AI applications are going to develop, and you are dependent on compute and computing resources. And by and large, in order to acquire these computing resources, you require deep pockets. So in economics, I say whether you build it on your own or you buy it off shelf, which is already created, or lease it. So then cloud service becomes very important in that context. So that was the starting point of our reason to doing it. And if just to give you some numbers, the Indian public cloud service market now is estimated to be around $7.5 billion, and the growth in the market is expected to have a significant impact, because we are economists, on the Indian economy, contributing almost 310 to or 380 billion dollars by 2026, and also being able to create 14 million jobs. So in this background, it is very important that these markets are efficient, these markets are competitive, and hence we got a deep dive into the cloud computing market and their competition landscape.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Malik. So, just to understand, so you touched upon how it's important for downstream applications, AI specifically. So, can you share some light on what is the significance for the downstream market, or what are the economics of cloud computing market? Like, what are some unique distinguishing factors of this market that make it unique? Hari, would you like to take that?
Yeah, sure, Bharat. I'll take that. So, if you essentially look at cloud, what are people doing? They are moving their data or an application or data processing from local infrastructure, like an in house server, to a server managed by someone else, and it's accessed through the internet. So, obviously, now you are actually taking your data further away from you. If people are more and more moving towards that, there has to be an incentive. If you are an enterprise, there are several incentives to move to the cloud. The first of these is scalability. Let's say you've launched an AI based service or some sort of internet based service that requires computing. You launched on day one, you have 500 users, on day two, you have 5,000 users, and let's say by day 15, you have 1 million users. If you are on local infrastructure, how are you going to suddenly keep buying computers overnight, configure them, deploy them, and integrate them to your existing infrastructure? Cloud, by virtue of the cloud providers being so large and having extensive data centers, whether it's AWS, whether it's Azure, whether it's GCP, all of them can scale like beyond the practical requirements of any single firm. So for any single firm, it's almost an infinitely scalable platform. So scalability is USP number one. Now, USP number two is flexibility. The thing is, whatever sort of digital service you run, not necessarily AI, there is a lot of variation in demand. Let's say if you're a food delivery platform, your peak demand comes in during lunch hour, maybe during dinner, but for the rest of the time, the platform's usage is quite low. If you're an OTT platform that broadcasts sports, when there's a football World Cup or a cricket World Cup, there are like hundreds of millions of users logging in. But the rest of the time, it's maybe tens or twenties of millions of users. So if you were on your own physical infrastructure, you would have to invest up to peak demand. Whereas if you're on the cloud, you just scale up for additional, you just increase your usage when there is peak demand. And when it goes back to normal demand, you're only paying for what you're using. So that's the flexibility part. Now, the third part is no matter how advanced electronics becomes, there is an inherent reliability problem. Let's say you have $1 million server. What if it fails? Now your entire service is down. But if you're on the cloud, cloud providers have failovers. If your primary server fails, it will seamlessly switch to a secondary server, and you're not even paying anything additional for it. And there is also automated data backup. Then, while they don't charge you anything extra, your data is being backed up. You don't have to worry about data loss. So it provides a lot of peace of mind to enterprises. Then another factor that might become more important for startups is reduce upfront costs. Let's say you're a 4 member startup team. You want to do something in AI. Are you going to buy like 50, 100 high-end NVIDIA chips, set up a cooling station, configure it, run it, keep 4 or 5 engineers on payroll? This is an extremely high upfront cost. Whereas if you use the cloud, even if your requirement is for a high-end server, you're only paying for your usage and the quantum of your usage. So your demand becomes quite divisible, even if you need a very expensive machine. And a final factor that would draw advanced users to the cloud is ecosystem services. If it's AWS, or whether it's AWS, Azure, or GCP, almost all advanced services which are basic to running it like a firewall are available as plug-in cloud services. In addition, there are AI agents and there are machine learning applications. So when you're on this thing, instead of like configuring something to your unique hardware, it's just plug and play. You just take the service in the ecosystem and plug it into your need. And there are, because these are such large ecosystems, there are like millions of trained app developers and backend and front end developers to make your life easy. So for an enterprise, this is a for someone who feels slightly secure about moving their data and is not subject to regulatory restrictions, like say financial or say healthcare, it's a fairly good move.
Right. So from what you're mentioning, what I can see is that there are a lot of advantages to economies of scale, a lot of network effects that are present. So you have one big established hyperscaler, and they're able to provide a lot of complementary services that can add value to their customers. Right. So you'll see that there will be some kind of an agglomeration on a few larger services. Right. So do you see that impacting the kind of market share, the way the market is structured? Can you talk us through how the market share in India looks like, and what are any of these kind of effects of agglomeration of these things that you can see?
Also, like to just piggyback on that question is that, and this is something of an antitrust law angle, is that whenever there's a competition analysis, you have to figure out what the relevant market is. In a sector which is, I mean, cloud services span geographical, like across the globe specifically. It doesn't even matter where a particular data center is located, you can still provide services around the world, right? So when you embarked upon this project, how did you go around thinking about how to define a relevant market, especially in this sector?
So let me take that first question as a first question, because that's for the application of the law. So this particular report is not a legal document, and this particular report is just looking at when there is an adjudication, these boundaries have to be drawn. And even to your question of global markets, data centers being in India, in situ, or being in Iceland, or being somewhere else. So that does not matter, because the market would then be taken unless there's competitive constraints coming from. So, in some sense, competitive constraints are all around the globe, because Microsoft may be having data centers somewhere else, AWS somewhere else. But the point being, when it comes to users in India, so if competition law would be looking at the impact of the conduct on users in India. So then the geographical market, in that sense, given the fact that all three or the major hyperscalers, which we have pointed out in the report, operate in India. So they may be having data centers everywhere, but from a user's perspective, they are operating in India. So the geography does not make so much of a difference. The geography makes a difference in definition of geographical markets if there are imports which are impacting or constraining a domestic player. But here, the hyperscalers, irrespective of where their data centers are operating in India for Indians. That means that is how the competition authority would look at, and that is how our report has therefore looked at in our stakeholder consultation. How does these hyperscalers and other participants, not just hyperscalers, there are now cloud companies, Indian cloud companies also operating in India, and their relationship with their users. And from what was the first question, I guess what is being pointed out is that bigness and scale effects and network effects would make sure that the entities would be large, and the entities which would be exploiting scale economies would have higher market shares, which now we would be addressing the market landscape. But again, in competition law, it is not the structure which matters, it is not the size which matters. So it is not about, when we are looking at competition, that they are very big. And I maintain that it is looking at their behavior and their conduct.
Right. To the other part of the question about how the market itself is in India, what does it look like? In your report, you mentioned that two of the big hyperscalers have a 42% market share. and there are different categories of services being provided, right? So infrastructure as a service. Can you throw some light into how the market itself is segmented, and how is the um, competition in each of these different segments that you have?
The Indian public cloud service market, in line with global trends, uh, is also very heavily concentrated among hyperscalers. So if you look at the overall market, considering all the layers, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service together, then the top 10 vendors in the overall Indian public cloud service market together account for around 60% market share. Microsoft has around 27% and AWS around 15%. And the rest of the vendors each have around less than 5% share in the overall market. But if we see the market by segmentation of the different layers, like infrastructure as a service, it's a more homogeneous category. Like there isn't much scope for public differentiation. There it is heavily concentrated. The top three vendors in this case, AWS, Microsoft, and GCP, together account for around 87%. And the PaaS and the SaaS markets are relatively, there is more scope for product differentiation, and there's a larger presence of companies there. So the top three vendors in these markets account for less than 43% and 41% share, respectively. So when we are talking about the hyperscalers, the Microsoft has a presence across all the three layers. But bulk of its revenue, like its total revenue in the Indian public cloud service market, is around 2.2 billion USD, and the bulk of its revenue, around over 70%, 72% or so, comes from its SaaS offerings. Mainly its productivity suite, like Office Productivity and other suites. And in this layer, in SaaS, it competes with Google. But also there are relatively new entrants such as Zoho, which are over the past few years, they have made some entry, like capturing on 6% share or something. But it is also, it was one of the first hyperscalers to open a local data center in India. And its main infrastructure as a service offering is its storage service. And over the past few years, its PaaS tools, its PaaS revenue has also been growing. It has registered the highest growth due to the sale of its database management services, application development and deployment tools, its AI platforms and all. AWS has the decisive advantage in the infrastructure as a service layer. It has around 60% market share in India there. And it's most of its like IS revenue contributes a bulk of its revenue in the overall Indian PCS market. So around 87% of its revenue in India in the cloud market comes from IaaS services, primarily cloud computing and storage. And Google also has also made its entry relatively recently. That's why its IaaS share is around relatively low at 4%. But it has acquired customers across various segments recently, and its push through AI-based applications in the cloud is helping it acquire customers across different verticals like BFSI, retail, and others.
Right. So you touched upon, I think, the different parts of the number of players, their market share, and it seems like although the few large players have a very dominant market share, especially in the infrastructure as a service segment, there seems to be a lot of competition in the other offerings that are there in the market. So, like Ms. Malik was saying, you might want to look into their specific practices. Are there? Can you prove that they were anti-competitive or creating entry barriers, or hindering competition, or these kind of things, right? So, going back to that part of the discussion, so what are the competition concerns that you see related to this? And again, how do you segment the market? One part is geography, where we touched upon, and you're talking about India or Indian users being the recipient of this service, but also creating the market definition itself. Would you look at competition as infrastructure as a service separately, platform as a service separately, or would it be a combination of all of these cloud service providers, the different services that they're offering? So two parts to this question. One is how do you define the market, and second, the different kind of competition concerns that you see. And Satya, would you like to add anything here?
Yeah. Also, in your consultation with stakeholders, when you were attempting to figure out the market share problem here, is that were there any other forms of market concentration which were evident in the actual infrastructure that goes into building these data centers for the cloud market. For instance, are Amazon, Microsoft, and Google similarly dependent on, let's say, NVIDIA for chips? Are there any other hardware providers that are similarly, placed very well in the market concentration, from the market concentration angle there as well? So regardless of whether we try to ameliorate competition concerns in the cloud services market as infrastructure software, regardless, will there still be a dependency? Will there still be concentration on the actual vendors providing the metacritical layer there, right? So that's a question.
You're going further upstream from the cloud services into the chips itself, right? So yeah. Any thoughts about this?
How we're going to structure our answers in this is that Hari will be touching upon the broader global competition concerns that we also observed are applicable in the Indian context, and I will, describe a little about the India-specific, competition concerns that might be worth looking at, or market trends that might be posing a bit barrier to some new entrants in the market. So. Firstly, when it comes to Indian context, in the competition in the Indian context, I think one issue that is generally not covered in broader market studies in other jurisdictions is to look at partnerships that are emerging, and this is in line with global trends that are following. But what we are noticing is that there is an emerging partnership between the hyperscalers and the telecom giants, and in this market. Basically, just to give an example, in 2019, Microsoft entered into a 10-year strategic collaboration with Jio Infocomm. So there are many aspects to this partnership, one of which was to offer integrated customized cloud offerings to SME, small and medium enterprises, and bundled with other offerings like IoT, blockchain, and others. That is one aspect of the partnership. Another one was Geo setting up data centers for the deployment of Azure Cloud Platform. Another aspect of the partnership was the Geo's internal staff migrating some of their applications to Azure and adopting Office Suite tool. So the broader point that I'm trying to make is that these hypers, and this is just one example, then subsequently after this partnership was announced, again, Bharti Airtel announced a collaboration with AWS for a similar kind of partnership to offer tailored cloud services to small and medium enterprises, an integrated ICT business portfolio. And Airtel also partnered with GCP to offer the G Suite services at a more affordable prices to smaller businesses, basically. So the broader point that I'm trying to make is that through these partnerships, the hyperscalers are harnessing the synergies with the dominant connectivity players, enabling them to get a direct access to the large pre-existing user base of these telecom companies, and thereby, rapidly expand their footprint into the Indian market, which would not have been probably possible otherwise. So that is one aspect of the partnership. It's probably not a competition concern, but worth looking into as a market entry barrier for smaller interests. And the second part about the partnerships, another different partnership that I'm talking about is one with system integrators, which are basically IT like consulting companies that help in digital transformation projects of enterprises. We are talking about the Infosys, the Wipros of the world, basically. So although these system integrators work with dozens of companies on average, but they have some certain top tier strategic partners, which are basically, if you look at the list, they have certain 10 to 12 top tier strategic partners, which are generally the hyperscalers with whom they have worked before on other digital transformation projects. So because hyperscalers already have this large ecosystem of strategic partnerships with these system integrators, they are able to also rapidly expand any new service, rapidly expand their cloud services. So there's a network effect that comes into play. These system integrators, they might be working with a lot of cloud companies, but then these top tier strategic partners, take up disproportionate amount of time of these system integrators. Like the system integrators have dedicated business units for co-developing solutions, marketing, sales, and all. So if a domestic cloud entrant wants to engage with this ecosystem of system integrators, they have to first reach a certain threshold level of revenue before they are able to drive adoption of their services. So that is by having This matters because the large enterprise segment, the large enterprises which take cloud services, they basically only allocate their workloads to the hyperscalers precisely because of this relationship with system integrators. They've already worked with a system integrator partner before. So, and those system integrators have specialized knowledge in 1 to 3 hyperscalers. So, they would say that you should be migrating the applications to that particular cloud. So, through that, the hyperscalers are capturing the larger enterprise segment. So that is the role of partnerships in the Indian. That's how they are shaping the competitive dynamics of the Indian cloud market. And since Bharath here mentioned about the different layers, right, and whether competitive dynamics are different, like across these layers. One thing I would like to mention is that if you're talking about vertically, like hyperscalers are vertically integrated, they have offerings in IaaS, PaaS, SaaS. So one channel through which this advantages them is like through the marketplace. Hyperscalers are marketplaces, cloud marketplaces where the SaaS offerings are hosted. So they get the metadata on the products, how consumers are using the prices, volumes, and all. So they're able to develop a competing products. So through through an insight into the marketplace where most of the SaaS services are hosted. Yeah. I think I'll hand it over to Hari for discussing the rest of the competition concerns.
Yeah, just 1 minute before this. So this is very interesting because the way Bhargavee has described. So, and as she has said that these partnerships are not anti-competitive, so to speak, but the scale has been achieved by, say, getting the entry points or getting into partnerships for the entry points to the use of cloud services, be it through system integrators or be it through these telecom companies, because telecom companies then bring a large scale application possibilities to these hyperscalers. So that's common business practice, and when it comes to looking, and that is why it just adds to my general point that largeness, bigness, may be due to the structure of the market as a consequence of the way things have been shaped or competitive strategies have been played out. So as long as these competitive strategies are not a way to create or erect artificial barriers to entry. Okay, these are not artificial barriers. This is a natural consequence of a business strategy, but they are not done to stop the entry of a competitor. Then these activities are fine from a competition law perspective. On one more question which was asked earlier was regarding whether or not the market would be defined, if at all there is a behavioral issue or a conduct based issue, will the market be defined individually? So it will depend upon what the issue is in what layer, all right, to see the competition constraints in that particular layer. But having said that, you have to also look at the fact that even if there is a possibility, because for these vertically integrated entities, even because they are in all the layers, they're present in all the layers, they conduct in one layer, as Bhargavi had pointed out, through marketplaces, can impact a conduct in the other layer as well. So because they're collecting huge amounts of data, being prominent in the SaaS layer, they could have spillover effects and leveraging effects in the other layers. So that becomes a very important thing. But those things require really collection of evidence on the ground. And this report has not gone into it and cannot also go into it. That these are investigative questions. Yeah, Hari, you can just now take over with the competition issues. Yeah.
Hi, Bharat. So, cloud service providers have been reviewed by competition authorities across the globe, and certain issues have been flagged as potential competition concerns. The first of them is egress fees. For example, no cloud provider will charge you money to put your data onto the cloud. But let's say at some point you decide, hey, I want to move from one provider to another, or I want to put my data back onto my own server. Now we need to take it all out. And for that, cloud providers charge a fee called egress fees. Egress is just another word for exit. So there are a couple of issues involved in it. One is that it has been evaluated by certain scholars that the egress fees charged by cloud service providers is highly in excess of their cost of actually moving the data out to whatever the new location is. So the price is much higher than marginal cost. And the second point is that this discourages people from moving data from one cloud service provider to another and hinders competition. Because and also the larger providers, the more established ones, their egress fees are were much higher than the smaller providers. The good news on this front is that most providers are gradually phasing these out, and in time, this will cease to be a problem. And smaller providers who are anyway competing with the larger providers don't have any egress fees. They are like, you can put data, take out data, not a problem. The next issue that comes under the scanner when it comes to cloud is committed spend discounts. Let's say I have a firm, a fairly large firm. I go to AWS and I've negotiated it down to the last bone. Then finally they say, you know what, this is the best price. However, if you commit to X spend, let's peg that X spend as $1 million. If you spend $1 million in a specified period, usually the financial year, we will give you a 10% discount over and above what this listed price is. So why is this a competition concern? Because a committed spend discount is essentially a retroactive rebate. So I will break that down for you. Normally, let's say you go to a place, you keep going there regularly, your relationship gets better, and now you say, going forward, I need a better rate. I need, instead of 5% discount, I need 10% discount. But that discount applies on what you buy in the future. But in a retroactive debate, what you're saying is that discount will apply to everything you have bought from me in this period. So let's take the hypothetical case of a company whose cloud spend is now $900,000. Now at $900,000, they have a decision to make on where to spend the next $150,000. If they spend it with their hyperscaler, whoever that is, because their committed spend discount on hitting $1 million is 100,000, their effective cost is only now $50,000. If they're spending to someone else, that somebody else has to beat $50,000 to get this marginal spend. So it makes competition at the edge very difficult, which is why committed spend discounts are very tricky from a competition perspective. Now, the next issue that has been flagged by several competition economists is cloud credits. Cloud credits are great if you're a startup who wants to use the cloud. The hyperscaler is giving out credits, you get to try the system for free. Win-win, right? But the problem is when you try the system, you build applications on the system. Today, your cloud spending is, say, $5,000 a month. In 1.5 years, your cloud spending is $50,000 a month, but you still can't get out of that cloud system. So it sort of locks in new users who may not have full visibility on what their growth trajectory is, how their costs will rise as their usage becomes more complex and more intensive. And smaller cloud service providers can't afford to give out their compute capacity or storage capacity for free. So it's basically just the hyperscalers drawing in users while they're small and waiting for them to grow big. And the competition in cloud among cloud service providers is made difficult because of very limited interoperability. Like if you're a large user, each cloud has strengths in certain areas. You can deploy a part of your cloud requirements on one cloud, put pipelines between different clouds, and run it. You use, like, say, GCP for analytics, you use AWS for data warehousing, you put pipelines between them. But for a small user, this is too much hassle to set up. There is no native interoperability. In an ideal world, we would have like a USB kind of interoperability where you can run any application on any cloud, port it. That doesn't work at all in cloud as of now. And frankly speaking, the cloud service providers have no incentive to do it because the minute you have it, your competitive pressure from any of your competitors will increase. And also in the products that are provided by the cloud service providers, there are licensing restrictions. So one famous case that was studied was by Professor Frederick Jennings in Europe about restrictions on running SQL servers. If it was run on Azure servers, there was one price. You got basically 2 virtual cores free, which basically equated to a 50% discount. if you run it on any other compute provider, your costs were effectively doubled. And this is estimated to cost a loss of nearly $1 billion, if I recall rightly, to European users alone. So licensing restrictions, because they set the terms and these are like industry standard products, it's a take it or leave it choice. And then the other big problem is tying and bundling. For example, if you get Office 365, you're getting Teams for free. But Teams is not really it's a collaboration software. It's not a productivity software. So that makes a better value proposition, because if you're running a business, in addition to productivity software, you also need collaboration software, especially when teams are workforce are going remote. So that is also an increasing problem. So these are the major issues that have been highlighted as concern when it comes to cloud services.
Yeah, so on the last issue, I'd just like to add that this is a classic bundling issue. So, because as in the opening remarks, I had said the bigness, how they have achieved bigness, as long as achieving that bigness was on competition on merits, because the fact that they got into partnerships or they have commercial arrangements with system integrators is kosher. And if I so that's not a problem from a competition lens, but certain behaviors then will come under scrutiny, because you don't want those behaviors to perpetuate that dominance, such that any kind of possible entry at the margins, what we as economists call contestability, is totally wiped off, because contestability helps. So it's not so even if you have and so in India also the small players are trying very hard, but what is happening is there is because of these certain practices, they're not able to dislodge these players. But in India, the good thing at is we are right now in a sweet spot, because there is a lot of unmet demand. Then there's a lot of small businesses now who are shedding their apprehensions about and also willing to spend on cloud services, rather than establishing all the services in house. So what is happening is that the market there is an entry, but it is getting fragmented. So the ability to dislodge these large entrants because of certain behaviors of theirs gets difficult. And the bundling issue is, as Hari has pointed out, Teams is not a cloud service, so to speak. It is a more of a collaborative mechanism through which we come and talk to each other, etc. So there were other competitors already. So does this bundling give, because Microsoft 365 bundles Teams, does this give, so I'm just putting it as an open question, give Teams an unfair advantage over its competitors, say Zoom, Cisco, WebEx, etc.? And this is a matter of inquiry. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think, Hari, it is a matter of inquiry now with the EU DG Comp.
Yes, ma'am. An inquiry is ongoing.
Hari, just on touching on one specific thing. So you mentioned interoperability as one of the concerns from a technical perspective, and in your report you also touch upon open cloud compute and how that might lead to interoperability between different cloud service providers. Can you speak a little bit about that to give some more clarity on that aspect?
Okay, so right now, cloud computing is very much a hyperscaler driven model. So, like I said earlier, if you're a large company who wants to scale significantly, or whose demand is expected to scale significantly, there are practically only not three, maybe five, six choices, including Huawei and others. But the thing is, technically, a server is something anybody who can afford the hardware can assemble. So, a server farm, the ability to scale it is only limited by how much money you have. But the problem is nobody has deeper pockets than the hyperscalers. So is there any other model in which you can pool different small cloud service providers? Let's say there's an A, B, C, D cloud service providers in different parts of India. But what if you could connect them together in a network, and then it becomes like a unified resource which is accessible even though they are geographically spread? So the thing is, the open cloud network is a decentralized network, and it's by design, anybody can, by the design in which it is conceptualized, anybody can plug into it. It's not a closed ecosystem that, okay, only these initial 5, 6 participants can. So that could possibly lead to an alternative ecosystem because smaller providers have lesser costs. And then the issues like the absence of a failover or what happens to backups all get addressed when you have a large system. Even the internet itself is a decentralized network. So they have a lot of power to scale, even in the absence of like large participants who are the driving force. And because like the hyperscaler driven model has concentration risks and geopolitical risks. So when we need to emerge as uh, let's say one of the leading force of the AI revolution, Indian firms should have access to Indian compute. So the Open Cloud Computing Initiative or any other alternatives to it, which are based on decentralized computing, would be a good option worth exploring and deserving of policy and monetary support from the government of India.
Yeah, so this again, Bhargavee, do you want to say something on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that right now this OCC concept is at a nascent stage. So, firstly, they are like when we talked to the stakeholder, during the stakeholder interviews, it just came out that right now they are focusing on basically getting these small domestic providers on board in this network through provision of standard interfaces. So the first aspect of the problem is to solve for the search and discoverability problem. Like enterprises don't know which domestic CSPs are operating. So, the first problem that OCC seeks to solve for is to the search and discoverability problem. And then move to the problem of solving for interoperability and all. And this is the OCC is going to be important going forward because when it comes to AI, so the idea is not to displace the hyperscalers. Hyperscalers provide the large computing power that is necessary for training large language models. So it's not like the small domestic CSPs can provide that level of computing capacity. But for inferencing and fine-tuning of models on smaller data sets, these the computing capacity from smaller providers can be used. So some amount of AI workloads can be shifted to these smaller providers. So the idea of OCC is to, eventually over the longer term to achieve that purpose, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what we are now in this, we try to bring this aspect also, because in India has been in some sense or front runner of sorts, has had a industrial policy response to the naturally concentrated markets, such that there is, because you have to, it's important to reduce dependencies. So it's not even that let's keep anti competitive conduct on one side. Let's just look at, because endogenously these markets are concentrated, scale effects, network effects, partnerships, the fact that deep pockets, etc. Even if we do away with the few anti competitive harm or anti competitive mechanisms they have adopted, but endogenously on their own, given the nature of the market, they are big players and they will become big players. And also, they have had advantages of the revolution, the digital market revolution, in various other markets, which give them deep pockets, which give them some data advantages, which gives them an understanding. And so they are good at their game. So we do not take that away that they are good at their game. But the point then is, do you want, and bigness, then now I'm coming to a structural problem which policymakers are trying to address. Do you want the structure to be so concentrated that the dependencies increase so much that there could be a time that we saw what happened? And I don't have a view right now, but there are people who are talking about when there was a breakdown of the cloud computing of Azure a few months ago. There was problem in airlines, problem in your banking system, etc., etc. So, do you want so much or such huge dependencies that you do not have an alternate at all? So, to create an alternate, so industrial policy responses are doing that. And India, as I said, is a front runner and sort that the UPI revolution is something like an industrial policy response to allow more decentralized payment systems in the country through a digital public infrastructure. Now, we do not know, these are early days, as Bhargavee has mentioned, whether or not open cloud compute can become a digital public infrastructure where small players can plug in due to open interfaces. You can aggregate workloads because of interoperability, and hence some workloads can be transferred, and some important workloads in the fine tuning layer of AI can be then transferred to open cloud computing, so that there is some kind of a distribution of workloads and some kind of a redistribution and some kind of a decentralization. So that's the idea.
Actually, you've answered one of the questions that I was planning to ask. So, related to, is there really a need for to promote an Indian or a domestic cloud computing market? Because in a except for some of the anti-competitive practices that you mentioned, the market tends to favor larger players. It has integration benefits. It has a lot of these network effects that you spoke of. So you're primarily saying that security is a concern, geopolitics is another concern, like Hari mentioned. So some of these might be the reasons why you would want to have a domestic presence. Is that what you're
Absolutely, Bharat. Increasingly, though as economists, we also are a little careful in saying to promote that you should promote national champions, because if you talk to our trade economist friends, they will never accept this as because these are the old days of protectionism and some sense old days of having national champions when we are an open globe and open interactions and so much of trade going on. But certain things now are becoming important, and industrial policies. One is chips. So we didn't answer, I think, Satya's question. So because that we would be addressing in when we are doing our AI market study, where we would be looking at all layers of the AI stack and looking at concentration in all the layers. So there too, India is trying to build domestic capacity. So some elements of sovereignty do come in also. Domestic capacity for chip fabrication and chip designs, we were already okay, but fabrication and actually doing having factories to do those chips in India. And then now we are talking about also cloud computing as a public infrastructure where governments need to put in some money. Recently, you would have also seen that there was in the newspapers that the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has come out with a tender for 1,000 GPUs. 1,000, I have really no sense how much 1,000 GPUs are they sufficient or not.
It's only 10,000, but that's also like peanuts in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly, they're peanuts in the so 10,000 GPUs. But I think the idea is that some element of self-sufficiency. Yeah, it is a very arcane idea when we talk about trade and other goods and services. But that idea is now gaining traction when it comes to goods and services in the frontier technologies.
I think we have looked at the nature of the market, the way competition is between these different players. So, for a Indian competition regulator, what do you see as the challenges in regulating this sector, and any key takeaways to conclude this discussion?
So I think, Bharat, I think this conversation was very important even for us because it has brought clarity to our mind because we are talking to you people. Because writing is something else, and articulating ideas after having written in a report is something else. So it's a multi-pronged strategy. The competition regulator is an important constituent of this multi-pronged strategy to at least bring in some reasonable competition, some reasonable contestability, entry, etc. So whatever is, and Hari pointed out, and I won't get into details, require some bit of understanding and some bit of investigation. The competition authority is the best place to look at whether or not. So we are not even providing any judgments. These are the standard practices which were looked at by other competition authorities. I am aware of certain cases, but can't discuss them right now in the context of international jurisdictions, where certain cases have also been opened up, because I don't think they have got a finality that we can say that they have come to a certain conclusion. But these have been flagged by other competition authorities as a possibility of locking in customers, that is, committed some spend discounts for a specific period, and incentivizing single sourcing. Interoperability, a lot has been spoken about interoperability. Again, this is clearly something which the competition authorities can look at, whether or not interoperability is provided, or interoperability is basically a consequence of the fact that the user of the cloud has to configure and manage a middleware and so to be able to multi-cloud, because interoperability is about multi-clouding. And why is multi-cloud important? It is not an end in itself. It is important, but because it does have an impact on your costs. And as an economy, if cloud computing would be an important input into so many applications, be it AI or be it even running a simple office, it's cost effectiveness in the end, it is efficiency in the end, which competition authorities should be worried about. So some bit of policy intervention would be required, but I'm saying this with a word of caution. Intervention should happen only after a complete understanding of the market and the outcomes of this behavior which we have pointed out possible anti-competitive behavior, because what struck us in our stakeholder interviews was it's not to act paternalistic. The stakeholders were not even, especially the large enterprises, were not even they were aware, but they took it as fait accompli that that's some bit of more expenses, but it is okay for making their lives easy. But if certain practices are introduced or looked into or corrected through policy interventions, be it lack of interoperability or how these committed spend discounts pan out, then you can bring in more competition into the market and then therefore affect the outcomes. So it is again, as I said, with a word of caution, early days. One needs to understand, and if possible, one needs to carry out a full-fledged market study. Ours was not a market study. Ours is just looking at issues and flagging issues and actually getting more stakeholders on board to even do some kind of an empirical analysis of the impact on competition. And last is that perhaps you are aware that the competition community or the policy community is discussing a digital competition bill, a draft digital competition bill, where cloud services have been identified as could be come under the category of systemically significant digital enterprises, SSDEs. And then, of course, if certain hyperscalers come under the ambit of SSDEs, they would be subjected to certain rules and ex ante regulations. But as I said, a lot more needs to be done from understanding this market.
Right. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for talking about your work. So this has been a very interesting conversation for us as we look into some aspects of this as well. We're looking forward to how all of these things play out in the near future, and especially as you say, right, the digital competition bill. So AI being adopted more widely, and a lot of people moving to the cloud even more. So you see that it's going to be an area of interest for a lot of people, and it was very interesting to hear your thoughts on this. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
It was great joining the podcast. Thank you for the invite, guys.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.